So I think one of the first things we decided is we wanted the platform to be very accessible. So you can be in public mode or private mode when you build a bunking pod. So if you're in public mode, that means it shows up on the marketplace. So anybody can go on the marketplace, have a look around, but as soon as they want to either message a host or check availability or look at somebody's profile, they have to sign up. And it's a 4-step verification process that we're using. Acata is the platform that we're currently using to do that. And it's a well-known platform. So we're basically making sure that people are real and they've got a kind of a footprint or a fingerprint or whatever you want to say in the social world, I guess you would say. So that's what it's checking. And we set a minimum score to allow them in. So I'd say that's like the first barrier that we have. The other thing we have is if somebody's looking at a bunking pod, especially going back to like my daughter, which is really the target persona, there's a women's safety score of 0 to 100. So they get to see that. So that area, they get a sense like a lady would get to see how safe is that. So I think that's another important factor. You're getting to see other people's profile. Once you request to join a pod and you're in a pod, now you can see people's profiles, so you're getting to know people, which I think gives you a level of feeling safer, right? So at least you've got a sense. And if you want to join a pod where the host has made it a rule that, hey, nobody can join my pod without having a successful criminal background check done in their bunking profile, there's a lot of people with our research that showed, like they would want to only join pods where they know everybody's been vetted from that standpoint. So it's like another level of protection.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and today I have Steve Cody, who is the founder of Bunking. So very excited to dive into what Bunking is and to hear a little bit more about your story. But thank you, Steve, for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on. Very much appreciated.
Of course. Well, this is I think I've said this, 3 or 4 or 5, maybe more times now on the show. This episode has been a long time in the making. You and I have been chatting for, I would say, a couple months, and got to chat with you a little bit when I was down in Mexico, and just to see updates and hear more, because I find what you guys are doing really interesting. But before we get into the big question, what is bunking? We're going to dive into your story a little bit. So what is your background prior to creating bunking.com?
Yeah, well, I mean, lifelong entrepreneur, kind of started really, I think, when I was 15 years old, very dyslexic. So school was not my friend. My grandfather, he was determined I'd go to university. So he put $10 a month in the bank for me. And he had done that for many, many years. And that was going to pay for my university or part of my university. And I can remember in grade 10, going to him and saying, look, at that time there was $1,200 built up. And I said, I want to start a window cleaning company. Can I take out the $1,200 and, basically buy a squeegee bucket and a ladder? And, he definitely wasn't happy hearing that at first, but my grandmother gave him a little bit of heck, got the $1,200 and started a window cleaning company. So I think, the window cleaning company was kind of, I didn't even know, for me, it was just a way of making money, right? So it was trying to make a living. And so there wasn't a lot of research done because it didn't take me long to find out I was scared of heights. So that was kind of my first. Yeah. So anyways, that's where the entrepreneur journey started. Kind of went from there. We were renting swing stages, these machines that came down the side of buildings. We'd be renting them from other people. And I'm thinking why don't I just buy them and I start renting them out? And so we got into the swing stage rental business, picked up a spider dealership, they were the best in the world. And, same thing, we were renting scaffolding at the time to access different areas. And I'm like, well, why don't I start buying my own scaffolding and I'll start a scaffold rental business. And that
Mm.
went into a lift equipment business, scissor lifts and booms, got into the bobcat rental business, um, sold. I think the kind of, at that time, kind of a pinnacle for me was selling the lift and the bobcat business to Hertz. They were owned by Ford Motor Company at the time. And that was on my 30th birthday. So that was kind of cool doing that. I went down to New York and my wife had planned a birthday party. So I had to be back that night. We were waiting to keep the fly. So we had to tail it back after signing the deal. So yeah. And then, just many things after that really that have kind of led to where I am today. So 6 different rental companies bought and sold, service businesses. I think kind of probably the biggest, I don't know, like struggle or pivotal moment for us was 2013. Our son passed away and I ended up in bed for about 9 months. We had 3 companies on the go at the time. So we had Cody Party Rentals. We had franchises across the country. Monster Halloween. We had like 26 temporary locations, the Halloween stores that open up for Halloween. And we had just
Yeah.
started a franchise operation called Cody Mobile, so mobile auto detailing and other things. And that was going quite well. But when I end up in bed, you're an entrepreneur, you got a lot of balls juggling and balls start falling. And so we had to have fire sales. And yeah, so that kind of, so we sold off our 3 companies and kind of got out of that, and we had built tech to help run those businesses, and ended up taking. I knew nothing about tech, but ended up taking that technology and turning it into a product. So that's how I got into technology.
So, and sorry to hear about the loss of your son. The did the Hertz, like all the rental companies, go before all of that, and then you guys were creating these other businesses just from that, or was that simultaneously?
Yeah, there were some rentals before Hertz. It took a year off because I had worked really hard. So
Yeah.
we had 4 kids at the time, so wanted to get to know them. My mother was getting married, had to go rent some tables and chairs, and I thought, man, that
Yeah.
was a horrible experience. So I said, I think I'm going to start a party rental company. So that's when we started Cody Party Rentals. We had sold that system after Nick passed, but we ended up buying back the original location. So we've had it for
Mm.
23 years. Started a linen rental business.
Mm.
Rockify, which was it's a rent anything marketplace. So different. Yeah. I love rentals, and I think, when we talk about bunking, I think bunking is a lot about rentals. It's a lot about bringing people together, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, because you come from an interesting perspective and interesting space when it comes to equipment rentals. Yeah, you building a technology platform on the back end to now getting into vacation rentals through bunking, which is very fascinating to me because I don't know if you've ever operated a short term rental before.
Not at all.
Not at all. See, I love that though because it brings like such a different perspective. It brings out such a different point of view than those who have operated, right? Like I think, and you kind of said this off screen, was that you've been able to, the perks of not having VC funding, right, is to go at your own pace, go when you feel like it's ready, get the feedback that you need in order to make the product better for the operator, for the guest, for your team, all the above. So now that we're jumping into it, a lifelong entrepreneur happens so a way to find your way into short-term rentals through this creative outlet. What is bunking and how did this come about for you guys to be like, there's something here, there's something that we can take on?
Yeah, well, it definitely didn't start like that. It started really with more of a family problem. So son and
Mm.
daughter, 23, 26, they had this great idea. They were going to head to this surf town. They wanted to go for 3 months. They were going to work from there, live from there, kind of do everything from there until they found out the cheapest place they could get on a temporary basis was $6,000 a month. So they could not afford that. And so anyways, I said, well, rent the place. and then go to Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, rent out the extra couches, rent out the extra rooms, and you kind of get enough people in there, you could live for free. And then my daughter kind of looks up at me and she says, well, what about axe murders and how are people going to pay? so it's like, okay, so those were concerns. And the axe murder thing was obviously a bigger concern. And I'd never been part of that world. So we just kind of went online to say, where can you find out about, if you're traveling with strangers or living with strangers, like where do they get vetted? Like, how do you know you're not living with an axe murderer? And I was really shocked to see that we couldn't find anything. So that was interesting, but it just seemed like an odd problem at the time. But then it got more interesting. My daughter, she's a TikTok influencer, and she's
I've seen a lot of her TikToks pop up. I've seen a lot of her TikToks pop up on my For You page randomly. I was like, what the heck? I know that guy.
Yeah, she just like shows up out of the blue, like say something, and then like you're on TikTok anyways.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, so
it's too good.
So she's a TikTok influencer. She's like, you know what? If we're going to live in this place for 3 months, I want to do collaborative living. And I'm like, what the hell is collaborative living? And she's there, well, that's where TikTokers get together and, they live together, they collaborate and do content and all this stuff. And she was showing me content houses in LA, and I'm thinking, wow, that's kind of cool. And then my son, he's a product manager in tech, and he's like, hang on a second. I never have an office to go back to. So if I'm going to live with people for 3 months, I want to live with people from technology. Like I want to learn, I want to mentor. And I think that's kind of like when the aha moment kicked in. I'm like, man, this is like themed living, something I'd never even considered. But it made a lot of sense, right? With the flexibility we have. So kind of went away and thought about it, and the word bunking or bunk had come up anyway, so my daughter had said. So I registered the domain name because I was really starting to get excited about the idea, and I came back, I said, well, here's my idea in terms of how I think we could fix this. And I said, we're going to build this marketplace, we'll call it bunking.com, and the way it would help to solve a problem like you guys are having is you'd rent that place for $6,000, you'd come back to Bunking, and when you get to Bunking, one of you would decide to be the host or the organizer. First thing you do is you create what we call as a bunking pod. Now, a bunking pod is a group of people. And you would specify my bunking pod is for 8 people. The theme of my bunking pod is collaborative living for TikTokers if my daughter was the host. And then the host would pick the rules of their pod. So example, like my daughter would likely pick, to get into our pod, you need to go to your bunking profile and get a successful criminal background check done. You need to go to your bunking profile and get a successful credit check done. You got to be double vaxxed. There's no smoking. So whatever rules that are important to her, she would put them in. And then she would start to lay out the characteristics of the group that she basically wants to be with. So, we're between 20 and 30. We're co-ed. We go to bed late. We all like to sleep in. We're a little bit rowdy. None of us cook. Whatever that is. Just so that it's like there's some cohesion there, and then start to lay out whatever the accommodations are, whether it's a public space like a hammock or a couch, or a shared space like a couple of bunk beds, or a private room with a nice king bed. So, and Bunking, literally you can set up the availability of all of those sleeping accommodations and have different rates. So that's kind of what Bunking is. So, another example I use, which I think is a good one, Will, is we have a lot of students coming in here from India. A lot of them have worked for us, and I hear their stories. So they come here from India, they're young, they don't know the language, they don't know the culture. Their parents have paid somebody a couple $1,000s in rent. They really don't know if it's a scam or not half the time. So with Bunking, they could look for a bunking pod with people of similar language, with people of similar culture. The money gets paid into escrow until they show up. So, we're solving a real problem. And I think at the end of the day, what we ended up building was kind of like a dating app, take like a Bumble or something like that, take a hostel, and then take an accommodations platform like a VRBO and Airbnb, and we're kind of mashed up. So we're not an accommodations platform. We're really more of a social platform that helps connect like-minded people for shared living or shared travel. A little bit. It's like kind of
There,
like almost like a marketplace that sits on top of a lot of these other marketplaces.
well, and it's so much more curated, right? Like you're not just, I think and I don't know if I told you this on our catch up in Mexico, but when I was in Mexico, I would have definitely signed up for a bunking pod because I think the one thing as I'm growing older and getting more self aware, not that I'm not self aware and whatever, but like I thought a solo trip to Mexico would be great. Realizing like I would actually love to have some company of remote workers that are entrepreneurs, that content creators, whatever that may be. Um, but I was there by myself for a month. I had my roommates or friends come for a week.
Yeah.
But after they left, it was like, all right, I have to like figure out this whole new language, and this whole new city and culture by myself, and no help other than Google Translate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it gives you more customization than like Airbnb would when you can just add filters, right? Like because with Airbnb you have to have a group or you have to be ready to be a solo traveler if you're used to it, right? Like you have to have those things in place. Where I think for what I've been seeing lately is that we're craving a lot more experience throughout everyday life rather than just, planned vacations or planned this. So something like this is allowing that experience to happen daily with a new group, with a curated group. And I think you guys definitely solved the problem. And kudos to your daughter who is able to call out the axe murder stuff first. I find that one to be the most important because that would have been my biggest fear too. But I also love that you kind of broke into three segments: is Bumble, Airbnb, and a hostel type environment. So for our host, my first question kind of comes into, for a host of a bunking pod, how do you price and manage the calendars of these different accommodation pieces inside that one home or yurt or treehouse or whatever that may be? How do you manage all of that within the bunking platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, when you go on the marketplace, we have a four-step process to help create a bunking pod. And in there, you would put in, your different areas where they're sleeping, and you define it either as public, private, or shared. And it'll allow you to, if you have 4 beds in a room, you can put 4 beds in a room. You can have rates, or you can have the software suggest rates. So basically, in the posting process, you can indicate if you don't own the place and you're renting it from somebody else, you could say, well, here's my cost, and it'll actually suggest a daily, weekly, monthly rate for all of the different rooms. And I think what's unique with bunking and what I keep hearing, well, it ended up being more of a safety thing, because when we did early research, we found out that 60% of people who stay in hostels are women. And when you talk to the women, it's not because they love hostels, it's because there's safety in numbers. And then when you ask them, like, what's the scariest part about a hostel? Well, it's like Russian roulette every time they go to bed, because they don't know who they're sleeping next to. So that's their biggest concern. So what we did with bunking is, if you're in a shared room, each bed is managed differently. So you can have a different price for bottom bunk and top bunk. But before somebody books a bed in a shared room, they can see the profiles of the people in the other beds before they make that decision. So I think it's really important. But bunking literally manages the inventory. So when you build a bunking pod, you can say minimum stay is 3 days or minimum stay is full duration. And it'll totally manage that availability for you. So right down to if somebody's doing a global search and you only have like 1 of 10 beds available in that search query, your bed will show up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it can go as big or as detailed as you want it to be for a traveler or for a host. On the guest screening side, can I ask, like, how did you guys build out? Like, I'm not a tech person. I interview a lot of tech founders. I go through the whole thing, but to get into screening, we have good friends at AutoHost and Safely and all these other companies out in the space. But for you guys, what was the criteria that needed to be matched in order to be approved for a bunking pod as a host or a traveler?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things we decided is we wanted the platform to be very accessible. So you can, and we'll probably talk about it after, but you can be in public mode or private mode when you build a bunking pod. So if you're in public mode, that means it shows up on the marketplace. So anybody can go on the marketplace, have a look around, but as soon as they want to either message a host or check availability or look at somebody's profile, they have to sign up, and it's a 4-step verification process that we're using. Acata is the platform that we're currently using to do that, and it's a well-known platform. So we're basically making sure that people are real, and they've got a kind of a footprint or a fingerprint or whatever you want to say, kind of, in the social world, I guess you would say. So that's what it's checking. So, and we set a minimum score to allow them in. So I'd say that's kind of like the first barrier that we have. The other thing we have is if somebody's looking at a bunking pod, especially going back to like my daughter, which is really the target persona, there's a women's safety score, 0 out of 100. So they get to see that. So that area, they get a sense, like a lady would get to see how safe is that, right? So I think that's another important factor. You're getting to see other people's profile. Once you request to join a pod and you're in a pod, now you can see people's profiles. So you're getting to know people, which I think gives you kind of a level of feeling safer, right? So at least you've got a sense. And if you want to join a pod where the host has made it a rule that, hey, nobody can join my pod without having a successful criminal background check done in their bunking profile, there's a lot of people with our research that showed, like they would want to only join pods where they know everybody's been vetted from that standpoint. So it's kind of like another level of protection, right? So, so there's and again, the bed thing that we put in. So I think safety is probably like the biggest thing, because when we did early research, like we spent 8 weeks just almost looking on Facebook groups, like who's trying to get together basically for sleepovers. So for shared living or shared travel, what groups are they? So we found like 12 main groups and about 110, we call them subcategories. So think people with accessibility issues, think vegans, think yoga, language, religion, culture. Like there's all these reasons people are trying to get together. But the biggest problem they have is trust on these platforms. And so I think for us, our biggest challenge, and I think we're doing a good job at it, is giving people a feeling of trust. And we have reviews and recommendations and things like that.
I actually just wrote down in my notebook that in early 2020, I was one of the first people in my group of friends or colleagues to say shared accommodation is dead. No one's ever going to want to live with. 100%. I remember just being like, oh, no one, like, because I remember a big thing with Airbnb was that people would house hack, right? They would buy this, or not buy, they would rent this big, house with, let's say 10 bedrooms, and they'd put as many beds in every bedroom that they could do, and they would create kind of like a bunking pod, but they would more or less just create a segment of the house to rent out, and they rent out individual bunk beds, whatever. And one, it wasn't vetted, because like I love Airbnb, but their host guarantee and all their other insurance and guest screening, like it's not really that great. As an Airbnb host myself, like we have had plenty of guests that had plenty of 5-star reviews that were just horrible people. So it says that it's there, but it's not. And so in the first early days of 2020, I was like, yeah, co-living, like all of this stuff gone, never coming back. No one's ever going to want to do it. But now from your guys' standpoint, you have the data, you have the research, you have the feedback that this is really, I think, being away for so long, and COVID, the lockdowns weren't as extensive as they probably could be. People in China are still heavily quarantined. So I can only imagine once that kind of restriction kind of deviates a little bit, we'll see probably a bigger increase. But you guys have been able to see that people are really looking forward to this sense of adventure, not just with their friends and family that they love, because let's be honest, friends and family that we love may not be on the same agenda that we want to do, right? Where it's like, I'm single with no kids, I can afford to travel, live, work remote. Yeah, my parents, my mom and dad both work at a job that you have to be present for, right? So like you have to be at work, you have to clock in, versus us where it's like I'm pretty much clocked in when I wake up, but I can do it anywhere where I wake up. So you guys were able to see that. Was that a shock to you guys in order to see that there was a actual response and community of travelers that are looking and craving for something like this?
Yeah, you know what? Like, I think it's kind of a shock every day because I talk to like every day we're talking to more people, and
Mhm.
it's a huge community. Like, there's a lot of people doing like shared living, shared travel. People have great stories, and people have not so great stories. But I mean, it's a big community. I think without COVID, I don't know. I don't know if this would have worked in North America. I think it would have worked fine in
Yeah.
Australia, UK, Dubai. And because when I talk to people over there about bunking, I mean, they almost do double takes because that's a way of life. And this is just going to make their lives better.
Yeah.
This is just kind of we're starting to have this freedom, I guess, in North America, where and we've got this mobility, and we've also, I mean, that's all the good side. We've also got a housing crisis, right?
Yeah.
We've also got a crisis where people need to live with other people, and we think bunking can help with that. We've got a loneliness crisis. People are lonely. People are getting ill. People are dying. There's like loneliness ministers. I think the UK just got their first one, but it's a real
Wow.
problem. And again, we think bunking can help with that. So there's a lot of fun stuff we can do, which we're super excited about, like the travel and all that stuff. But there's also a lot of humanitarian things we can do just to help. So we're very
Yeah.
excited about that as well.
100%. And as a person who has struggled with depression and anxiety and all this stuff, like I totally think, that it's it's very interesting. And like I know a lot of people talk about it. Like we're so used to that instant dopamine hit, right? When we wake up, we check our phone and we have notifications. And when we post on Instagram or LinkedIn or TikTok, like we're instantly looking for the reaction, right? Like there's all these things, but still that I just don't know if we'll ever get to the point where like I don't know, in person stuff for me will never replace that, even though that's something that instant hit is what we always look for. And so I think like when you have that ability to balance, heavily balance, I would say, in order to have, yes, it's cool to be on your phone and to have that freedom of creativity, whether it's creating a TikTok or having a community, maybe a virtual happy hour or whatever that may be. But you definitely need that in-person ability to turn off, right? You need to be able to process emotion, to process thoughts, and to process like not even process, just to have a community of real life. Not that your connections online aren't real. I've met, October was a big month for me when I got to meet people that I haven't met in person for the last 2 years, and to see that they're a real person and to carry through that, it only enhanced the relationship. So for you guys, when it comes to creating this community, what's the big, like how big can this get? Like I think you kind of mentioned about the housing crisis and stuff like, and we're definitely experiencing heavily inflation with
Lost you, Will.
overall. Can you see me?
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
How big can this get? I think was where I lost you.
Yeah. How big can this get for the overall travel community outside of kind of the certain touch points that you just kind of talked about?
Yeah, I mean, there's three buckets we focus on. So with bunking, so shared living, so roommate living is basically one. Travel and retreats is another, and then work remotely. So those are really the three buckets that we're focused on to get started. And the more we look into it, I think just the more excited we get in terms of like. There's a lot of businesses like we started Ruckify, it's a rent anything marketplace. Our biggest problem there was changing consumer behavior, which is really hard to do, get people to adopt. And I think with bunking, the difference is I don't think we're changing anybody's behavior. We're just kind of making it a little bit better. So we're helping
Hmm.
people along. And it's like we're not inventing anything. People have been doing
Yeah,
this forever. We're adding in a little process, we're adding in a little technology. Um, we're still allowing as much freedom as we think, and we're listening to that community, like you know passionately listen to that community to get feedback to say like how can we make this better. So yeah, we think we're super excited. I mean, to say how big can it get? The rubber's got to touch the road. We've all got dreams, we've all got fantasies, and we've all got crazy projections. But I think when the rubber hits the road, and when we're a couple of months in, and we kind of just when we're feeling that kind of market acceptance, like that's when we'll really get a sense of how big this thing can be. So
for sure. Well, and it's rare for the audience that's listening. It's rare for us to interview a founder pre real launch, right? Like this is the very beginning stages. Well, not very beginning, but very early on stages of the company and the concept. But I did find it really fascinating because you guys launched Bûnking Ventures, where you're actually going to be buying these properties, these co-living. I think it was Costa Rica, right, where you guys just bought your first property.
yeah, well, we're under contract. It hasn't closed yet, so it's a boutique hotel. But the idea, really, with Bunking Ventures is when we started bunking, we knew we wanted to raise money, but we didn't want to raise VC money. We wanted to be able to build a company. I would say, I hate to use the word slow, but maybe
Mhm.
cautious is a better word. So we want to be able to build it without a lot of pressure, be able to iterate, listen to the community, and really, really get it right before we put fuel on the fire. And I think that's just not, when VCs give you money, like they're giving you the fuel.
Yeah,
They want you to go right now, and you're maybe making one, maybe two bets. So we really wanted to stay away from that. So how do we raise money? So we thought, well, if we start buying destination real estate, um, boutique hotels, like kind of 6 bedrooms to 20 bedrooms. That could be a big house or whatever. Already
yeah,
generating revenue. We buy it, we convert it to a shared living model. So right away, we get a 30 to 40% revenue bump. And then a lot of these destination locations are busy, you know, like the peak seasons are because of great weather, and they've got this shoulder season that they've got a hard time filling. And because bunking, we have 110 different communities, right? Groups, interest groups that we have on the platform, we think that we can fill these places in the shoulder seasons with these different interests. So, increase the rates, increase utilization, better ROI, and then we can take that cash flow, bring it back in, and help pay for our technology business. So it's kind of like, it's not, bunking is a marketplace, and the properties we
yeah,
own on Bunking Ventures will be insignificant, compared to the inventory that'll be there. But it'll kind of be a good way to help kind of feed the monster.
yeah. To feed the monster, I like that term. I will definitely be using that one for the future. Um, No, it's just super cool. A conversation comes to mind with this guy that we had on our morning show called Pat, who's been a digital nomad for like 15, or no, it's not 15 years, since 2015. And I think, like, just from your guys' understanding with this community, know, I'm understanding that you guys have learned so much from them, right? They're giving you so much feedback. Has there been a piece of feedback or advice or a suggestion or even an idea from this community that has kind of been like, oh my gosh, like we never thought about that? Especially coming from like, if you'd never done remote travel, remote living before, like let's say your daughter, has been where you guys are for most of her whole life, has done a couple weeks here, maybe at the most, but never been a digital nomad person for 2015. Anything that kind of took you by surprise that actually was like, oh, we never thought about that.
Well, I think the one, where I talked about it earlier, where, if somebody's going into a shared room, being able to look at the profiles of other people before they book that room, that came from early research. And that was really
Yeah.
from people that stayed at hostels, women. and,
Yeah.
trying to really, how can we make that a better experience? Um, a lot of the product is, I mean, the way we tell the story, it sounds all very simple, but it's been like an iteration, a lot of design thinking, a lot of research. So we've already made a lot of changes. Like, when you join a pod, you join a chat. People really want to we did a bunking beta or mid last year. So we kind of simulated what a bunking pod would be like. And we had 9 strangers to get together, and we were able to learn from that. So that, the fact that they all got to meet each other on Slack at the time, because we didn't have the
Yeah.
technology, was huge. So 6 of the 9 people were really anxious about going. It was a 20 to 30-year-old group, co-ed. It was a remote work session, no drinking. So we tried to have like a theme. We tried to have rules. We tried to have characteristics. And the 6 people that were, like very anxious about sharing a room or going. I went on the last day, and none of them wanted to leave. They just had a reunion maybe a month ago. And what's really cool is not only would every single one of them go back to a bunking pod, they would host a bunking pod, which to
Wow.
me was beyond my wildest expectations. So, yeah. So if you, I mean, like like really when you see the product, it's not us building the product, it's the communities that we're talking to that are guiding us. We had the general idea, like, okay, my daughter and son want to go, they can't afford this place by themselves. So,
Yeah.
how can we get people to pitch in and help? That was kind of the general thing. Then you get into design thinking, and you start doing user interviews and testing out different mocks and different things. And that's how you get your feedback. So, yeah. So, we talked like Shopify reached out a while, are you going to do this? A couple of things they want. Big thing was like book now, pay later. Some people can't
Mm.
afford to do what they want to do. Pets, pets are a big thing. People have a hard time traveling with their pets, and a lot of people want to travel with their pets. So we'll
Mm.
offer pet insurance through the platform. You can get pet insurance on Bunking, right? So those kind of things. So, yeah, I
That's
don't
really
think there's
interesting.
not one aha. Like, there's not one kind of nugget I
Yeah.
can give you. Like, it's just it's basically everything.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I love the beta program. Like, just to hear that none of them wanted to leave. They're having their reunions. Like, that's the real power of travel and the ability of hospitality, right? Like, I just think it's so cool that they get to experience something so, like, the anxiety going into an unknown pod of people. Like, it's like a reality TV show, right? Like, you're like going on Lost or something. It's just like you get thrown to the wolves and you don't know who you're with, and to hear on the other side that they're really like they've had a bigger takeaway with that community and that relationship than anything. And of course, and willing to turn, what, it was 6 people, or how many people was
There
it
were 9
you guys
people.
did?
6 of them had anxiety, like big
So
time anxiety about going.
well, now you just turned 9 people into 9 other hosts for other, communities that could potentially form anywhere around the world. So, yeah, that's a pretty big impact.
And I think helping people, right? Because if you look at the
Yeah.
world right now, we all have more anxiety. We're all a little more lonely than we were before. So
Mhm.
with bunking, I think we kind of create this on ramp for people back into society, because you get to kind of pick that you're going to join people with a specific theme. You get to see the rules, you get to see kind of the characteristics. So you're really kind of comfortable going in before you're in. It's not like you're joining a
Yeah.
tour or a travel group, and it's, you're only going to find out when you get there. And then you get to chat with them online. So you kind of get to know, so there, it's like, for us, it's like a lot about easing anxiety. And we look at
Yeah.
down the road, we look at like passports and work visas, and, just, it's like when somebody's sitting on the couch and they think, well, you know what, I think I want to travel. Okay, that's where, like, when that thought hits somebody's mind, that's where bunking
Yeah.
comes in. And it's like us looking at that process and saying, how do we take anxiety out of that process? How do we help that person have an amazing experience and want to do it like 1,000 times again? So
Yeah.
that's right now we're focused just on the booking process and in the pod, but over time we're going to start, we want to be right when that person's on the couch, And that little inkling of an idea kind of appears in their head. And then we'll take them through the journey and make sure that it's a good one.
I love that. Steve, out of all the years of entrepreneurship, from multiple different businesses, I can't imagine, starting from a window cleaner, realizing you're scared of heights, to be like, all right, I need to grow this thing so I never have to get on that ladder again. So what's the biggest takeaway lessons that you've had over however many years you've been doing this? What's the number one thing that you always reflect on when it comes to the journey, whether it's been a successful one or unsuccessful, that you say, I could always say that this has been true, thick and thin?
I think it's, well, two things. I don't know that there's successful and not successful. That's all in the way you view it, because you're always learning, right? Nobody can take that away from you, and that's part of the journey. So we're always having success as long as we're using that in the future. But I think the thing that sticks with me the most, and really figured it out after our son passed, was, there's always a way. You can always find a way. So, if you're willing to put in the work and you want to stick with it, it may not be the way you first planned it, but there's always a way. So I think that's the biggest takeaway.
I love that. That's good. Good advice. The last question we always like to ask every guest on the show is, if you had one link, and I'm assuming I already know what it is, but if you had one link to send anybody that's listening that wants to find out more about you, Bunking, anything you guys are doing, what would it be? Obviously, we're going to include more than just one link on the show notes, but if you had one that you want anyone listening to choose, what would it be?
Bunking.com. Yeah, Bunking.com. You can find us there. We'd love your feedback. We haven't figured this thing out completely. So if anybody goes on Bunking.com, you have an experience on bunking, whatever it is, we'd love your feedback. Thank you.
100%. Yeah, of course. And so for all the listeners, I did get a tour of Bunking. On the back end, I did get to do a walkthrough as a potential host, as a potential traveler. I got to ask my very intriguing questions, like, how does this work? Explain more. Super intriguing and detailed. But at the end of the day, it was really nice. I had a great walkthrough. It definitely made me even feel comfortable. I was like, I could definitely host a bunking pod one day. So I could definitely tell that in the future, once you guys are fully launched and ready, there might be a podcast bunk pod popping up on your
Awesome.
platform there.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Steve, so much for joining me. And for all the slick talkers out there, check out, like, and subscribe, everything in the show notes. And of course, we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.